The billionaire class is about to get away with history's biggest rug pull, and everyday Americans are going to be footing the bill. What we are watching with the SpaceX IPO doesn't look like a clean public offering. It looks like a vibe-coded vaporware app that's being sold as the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it's all designed to turn private billionaire paper wealth into a public market crash. And all of that cash is going to be withdrawn from the pensions and 401ks of everyday people. And when it all comes crashing down, we're going to be hearing all of that same too big to fail BS that we heard the last crash. And that's going to be the story as another billionaire bailout gets kicked off. The billionaire class still gets to make horrible bets, and we get stuck with the bill. The SpaceX IPO has a structure of a historical rug pull setup. It's got inflated valuations, restricted supply, demand from index funds, and a billionaire tax strategy that lets the rich borrow against hype while everyday investors absorb the downside. Let's make sure that we understand the basic setup. SpaceX is public and the stock has already been treated as if it's some cultural event. Reuters reported that SpaceX's IPO made Elon Musk the world's first trillionaire on paper. Business Insider and MarketWatch also reported that retail investors piled into the stock hard in the first few trading days, with retail buying in SpaceX outpacing many of the biggest tech names combined. So the question becomes, what happens when the whole thing crashes down? And who is standing in the landing zone that's going to get caught in the blast? Because when you look at the structure of this IPO, the story is really simple. Everyone that's an insider gets a path to liquidity, and the public gets a story. And the retirement money that gets pulled towards the stock through passive investing sets all of us up for the fall. Because workers aren't day trading stocks. They're saving for their retirement through funds that buy what the index tells them to buy. That's the whole point of having an index fund. So you're minimizing the risk. But when a mega cap stock gets pulled into the system, that buying pressure becomes automatic. And this is where the entire scam gets exposed. To understand the SpaceX IPO, you have to understand one of the oldest billionaire tricks in the book, and that's how billionaires make money. Now, many of us think that billionaires got to be billionaires because they worked their asses off. That's a complete fantasy. They got to be billionaires by gaming the system and setting up all the rules of the game that's designed to benefit them. And one of the biggest ways that they became billionaires is by extracting as much value and underpaying their workers as much as possible so that they could drive their profitability. But that's just scratching the surface of how billionaires actually make money. Because what they actually make money on is through a series of passive investments and assets all over the place. And to accumulate all those assets, they use a strategy called buy, borrow, die. And it sounds like a joke, but it's a real tax strategy that only the ultra wealthy and particularly the billionaire class gets to use. And the way it works is like this. The wealthy buy assets, stocks, company shares, real estate, whatever. Those assets go up in value, but instead of selling them, which would require them to pay their taxes, and we know how billionaires don't like paying taxes, while at the same time complaining about how they pay way too much, what they do is they hold on to those assets and then borrow against them. The ultra wealthy use a vehicle called an S block. It's a securities-backed line of credit where their stock portfolio becomes collateral. It's similar in concept to what we use in terms of a home equity line of credit, but this is for rich people. And basically, what it allows billionaires to do is that it allows them to establish a revolving line of credit that lets them borrow money using securities in an investment account as their collateral. They don't sell any of that stuff because, again, selling means that you would have to pay taxes on the increase in value that you gained. So that's capital gains tax exposure. They don't want to do that because these parasites, all they want to do is extract as much as they can and hoard wealth. So what they do instead is borrow against the value of their portfolio. And then when they die, their heirs, they get to benefit from that because they inherit all of that and they get it at fair market value on the date that the billionaire dies. So basically, the billionaire has spent their entire life gobbling up assets and incurring debt so that they can buy more assets. They drop dead, their heirs get all of those assets at fair market value and never have to pay any of those taxes that they would have had to pay because of the increase in value. And what that does is that it wipes out a lifetime of untaxed capital gains. That's the whole scam. This is how billionaires make money. That's their entire game. Their entire game is to leverage their portfolio, borrow against it to buy more stuff and never pay taxes. And when you think about that game, what we have to understand is that the billionaire doesn't work. They do literally no work. They sit around and collect money off of their portfolio. In fact, if you have just $1 billion, you're generating $27,000 in passive income just from interest on the value of your assets. So the idea that these people got to where they are because they worked hard is a complete joke. They inherited the money, they leveraged the loopholes in the tax system to never pay taxes, they continue to buy up everything under the sun, and they make risky bets all over the place because they know that the system is going to protect them from any losses, and they get to keep all of the benefits. The people who end up paying the bill is us. And that's how the whole thing is set up. Average workers are selling their time and getting taxed on their paycheck, while billionaires hoard resources and assets all over the place, inflate them, borrow against the paper value of those assets, and then that's called wealth management, and they never pay taxes on it. There's a reason why I call these people parasites. And that brings us back to SpaceX. Because when SpaceX went public, the shares to their company became easier to price, pledge, borrow against, and sell. Now, even when SpaceX was private, those shares were worth something. When SpaceX went public, it gave the entire billionaire class a golden ticket. And that's why this IPO is important, because what it allows the billionaire class to do and Elon Musk to do is that it allows them to hype this paper innovation company, this paper rocket company, as the next big thing, put it on the public market, have it get exposure from our private retirement and pension funds, and they get to extract whatever happens out of it. They turn all of that into collateral. And that collateral is the language that the billionaires speak. Let's not forget that Elon has been playing this game with company shares before any of his companies went public. Elon has done it with Tesla. He did the same thing with SpaceX before it went public, and he used it as collateral for loans. How do you think the Twitter acquisition was financed? SpaceX going public makes this scam easier to pull off because the offering is structured around scarcity. Only 5% of that stock is offered to the public, and it's offered at an enormous price per stock for investors. So what that means is that there's tremendous artificial demand built for this stock, even though the financials don't justify it actually even being made public. And what that means is that because it's being listed on these indexes, the average investor, the Joe Sixpack and Jane Sixpack person that's out there who's got a 401k or a public pension, those pensions are going to be invested in those index funds that carry SpaceX. And when everything goes sideways, those investment vehicles that everyday Americans are relying on for their retirement are going to get tanked. It's going to be the housing crash, except worse. Now, what's interesting is that just like everything else that the billionaires get involved with, the rules of the game were changed specifically so that SpaceX could go public. Normally, there's months of waiting time and vetting that has to happen before an IPO can go public. For SpaceX, it was 15 days. And you're seeing many of the other exchanges put their thumbs on the scale to make it easier for SpaceX to be listed on their exchanges as well. All of this is done to advance the hype cycle of this company. And the market hasn't had time to decide, is this even legit? And that's the problem. Because everything's rushed, nobody has the time to actually evaluate what this company is actually worth. Nobody's had the time to ask the question, is this valuation sane? And what happens if it goes sideways? Who's on the hook? Those are the questions that we should be asking, but aren't getting asked because the numbers don't make sense. So when you look at the financials of SpaceX, they reported $18.7 billion in revenue in 2025. And when you look inside those numbers, Starlink-driven connectivity accounted for about 11.4 billion of that, and AI contributed to 3.2 billion. And on top of that, Morningstar reported that SpaceX's capital spending went through the roof, accounting for about 10 billion in the first quarter and 7.72 billion of that being allocated towards AI. And while all of that is happening, reporting agencies noted that SpaceX's cash fell from almost 25 billion at year-end in 2025 to almost 16 billion at the end of the first quarter in 2026. Does that sound like it's on solid financial footing? It sounds like something that is already failing that needed an injection to keep the hype cycle going. Just like every other Elon Musk company and every other billionaire company that's focused on AI, this looks like another one of those giant Ponzi schemes. And what's interesting is that SpaceX brands itself a rocket company, but in terms of where its money comes from, first it's rockets, then it's Starlink, then it's AI, then it's Musk talking about going to Mars, then it's military contracts, then it's broadband, then it's data centers. It's whatever story that these billionaire parasites want to tell the market and Wall Street so that they can keep the gravy train rolling. And all of that makes this look completely insane. And it's the classic billionaire move. They're playing that shell game where whatever the story of the moment is, when that gets shaky, they shift the narrative to something else. And when that gets shaky, they move to something else. It's a constant game of whack-a-mole where they're lying to everybody and anybody so that they can keep the cash machine going. The TLDR of all of that is that this is a company that has no business going IPO. Its valuation target is through the roof when you look at its revenue. And that's the same playbook that Tesla is running off of. Tesla brands itself a tech company, but it's a car company. That's the product. And it's being valued as a tech company, even though it hasn't been able to sell its product with any real consistency. All this points to is that this IPO is less about funding the growth of SpaceX, and it's looking more and more like giving the inside investors a path out of all of the other shitty investments that they've made over the years. When you look at who is going to be able to buy this IPO, any and every AI company billionaire is going to be looking at SpaceX IPO as a way to park their funds and let that grow while the AI market collapses. I've talked several times about how the entire AI narrative seems like a giant Ponzi scheme. What all of this is doing from a SpaceX perspective is that it's creating liquidity for billionaires to parachute out of a tanking market when their AI investments go under. It's creating an exit path. What it's doing is it's giving people who got in early a bridge to cash out, while those of us who get into it late at this IPO stage have to stand there and hold the bag while the whole thing crashes. And that's where the whole buy, borrow, die strategy matters, because this is another way that you can actually execute that buy, borrow, die strategy if you're a billionaire and tie it to an IPO. You get a bunch of those shares, borrow against it, and you keep the money train going. And when this inevitably goes sideways, and it's going to go sideways, we're going to see again the billionaires get away scot-free and the millionaire class get away scot-free. This has been the pattern. It's been the same scam that's been run over the last 50, 60 years that's resulted in a $90 trillion wealth transfer from the bottom 90%, you and me, to the top 1%. So what does this mean for normal people? It means that your retirement account is going to be the shock absorber that takes all of the damage from billionaires and their crappy investments. Because the average worker who has a pension or a 401k didn't invest in XAI. The average teacher didn't decide to light their money on fire in the AI arms race. The average nurse didn't buy Twitter. The average warehouse worker didn't choose to build a corporate empire where every business gets stapled to this Musk narrative about going to Mars. But because all of us are invested in some sort of index fund, retirement funds, or passive investing, we're still going to get pulled in when this whole thing goes under. Their entire scam is designed to work that way. Socialize all the risk, so we're on the hook, but all the upside, they get the benefit of. We saw it in the housing crash, and we're going to see it again. Whenever there's been an economic crash, billionaire class has gotten richer. And that's what's going to happen again. This is how they socialize their losses. We're on the hook for it. They don't need to ask Congress for a bailout every time. And in this case, they're using the stock market to get their own bailout. They wrap that bailout in the language of innovation, and they call it democratized investing. They say regular people can finally have a chance to own a piece of the future. But what they're actually doing, like they've always done, is fattening up regular people for the slaughter that's eventually coming. And that's the privilege that they have while they sit there. Now, what we should be looking for over the next several months is what happens to that stock. After the initial buzz wears out, what do we see in terms of the trend line of the SpaceX IPO? You're going to see all sorts of promises being made, but what's the actual market doing? Because under no circumstances should a company with the financials of SpaceX be a publicly traded company. It's built on a foundation of sand. And what you're going to be looking for over the next several months is who's heading out for the exits, what's going on with their prices as publicly gets hyped as the next big thing that everybody should be investing in. And while that message is being pushed out by their media mouthpieces, what's the billionaire class doing with the stocks that aren't available to the public? What are they doing behind the scenes? There's a reason why I said that we're going to be witness to one of history's biggest rug pulls, because nothing about this IPO makes sense. And when you think about who is pushing it, what does Elon Musk actually accomplish in his business career? He's never built anything. He's never grown anything from zero. He's been extremely successful in marketing himself as some sort of genius, when the reality is that this guy can't talk his way out of a paper bag. And the fact of the matter is that this is all smoke and mirrors. The story that you're being sold about SpaceX, the story that you're being told about Tesla, the story that we've been told about all of these billionaires and their genius, it's complete BS. These people are good at one thing, and that's ramping up the hype machine to get us to invest in their shitty companies and their shitty stocks, while they literally watch people die on their shop floors. That's the only thing that this billionaire class is good for, and Elon is no different. And just like Tesla is valued in a way that makes no sense, SpaceX is in the same boat. And in the end, what that means is that this is going to be a complete and utter disaster, and yet another instance where they get away with highway robbery and one of the all-time heists, while you and I get stuck holding the bag, wondering what just happened.